Welcome to the Inner Self Confidence Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Delamont. Real talk for women who are done overthinking, freezing, or abandoning themselves. If you are ready to feel calm in your body, trust yourself, and speak up without forcing it, you're in the right place. Because confidence isn't something you perform, it's something you build from the inside out. Let's go. Welcome to a bonus episode of the Inner Self Confidence Podcast. This is a bonus episode because I'm doing something different than what I normally do. Today's episode, I'm going to read to you an essay that I have just put into a writing contest. Now, most of you probably already know that I've written my first book, Trust the Flames, and I'm currently writing my second book. I've also been writing articles for publications like Mamamia, Huffington Post, Women's Agenda, Newspaper. I love writing. And so I want to share with you something that I have written. If this is something you enjoy, let me know and I will do this more often. Okay, so this essay is how I learned to leave. By the time I moved to Australia for the third time, I had already spent most of my life leaving. Before 30, I had traveled to 30 countries. I had studied abroad, moved states, lived out of backpacks and storage units and temporary sublets with thin walls and borrowed furniture. From 11 to 18, I moved constantly between my mother's trailer in the woods of West Virginia and my father's suburban New Jersey home, learning early how to compress a life into bags that couldn't be carried. Leaving became less of an event and more of a rhythm. Airports felt more familiar to me than permanence. I learned how to detach quickly, how to become adaptable, how to make home out of almost anywhere. I learned how to fold myself into new environments the way people learn a language, through repetition and necessity. By my 20s, movement had become part of my identity. I was the girl who left, the girl who booked one-way tickets, the girl who chased freedom across oceans and called it intuition. But looking back now, I can see that some of my leaving was adventure and some of it was inheritance. The first time I left for Australia, I was 23 years old and I didn't know what I was doing. That was part of the appeal. I packed a bag, bought a one-way ticket, and told myself I wanted to see the world. The second time I was 27, restless in a way I couldn't explain, trying to outrun a version of myself that no longer fit. Before I left, my best friend Alicia gave me a necklace that said, "Not all those who wander are lost." I wore it for years like a personal philosophy. Proof that movement meant growth. Proof that leaving automatically made you brave. At 27, I still didn't understand that there is a difference between wandering and arriving. Both times I came back to America eventually. Back to familiarity, back to the life I knew how to navigate. The third time was different. The third time I was 30 years old, standing in a parking lot in Los Angeles with two suitcases and a ceramic Buddha statue my mother had given me years earlier. Back when she was still alive. Back when she could press objects into my hands like small blessings and say, "Take this with you," without either of us knowing it would one day become one of the last pieces of her I would carry across an ocean. The air smelled like concrete warming in this California sun. Planes crossed overhead in slow white streaks. Somewhere nearby, a shopping cart rattled loose across the asphalt. I remember thinking, this is what it feels like when your life is about to split into before and after. The third time, I wasn't leaving for adventure. I was leaving for love. Not the poetic kind people write about after the fact, the terrifying kind. The kind that makes you look irrational to everyone around you. The kind that asks for everything before it offers proof. I was leaving for a man I had known for 9 months, a man I had only spent a few weeks with in person, a man I had married after 4 months in a small Las Vegas chapel on a Sunday afternoon in December, with my best friend walking me down the aisle, a pianist playing canon in D, and an officiant named David, my father's name, which I took the way I always take these things, as a sign. People ask me now what it feels like to make a decision like that, and I never know how to answer without sounding reckless. The truth is, it didn't feel reckless at all. It felt calm. That was the strangest part. There are decisions in life that arrive loudly, dramatically, with chaos attached to them. This wasn't one of those decisions. My body had recognized something long before my mind could explain. Being with Kenny felt less like meeting someone new and more like remembering someone I had somehow always known. I met him at Burning Man in August. He was my ex-boyfriend Finn's friend. Finn, the man I had loved across ocean for years. The man who had broken my heart slowly enough that I kept mistaking the pain for hope. Kenny showed up in the desert wearing fluorescent green suspenders and white ski goggles pushed on his forehead, decorating my pink bike with lights before I had even arrived at camp. He was the kind of man who came back for you when your bike chain fell off and everyone else had ridden ahead. The kind of man who listened carefully when you spoke. The kind of man who made you feel seen instead of managed. We lived on opposite sides of the world after Burning Man ended. Him in Sydney, me in Los Angeles. We FaceTimed for hours every day for months. We talked the way people talk when they know distance is real and something important is unfolding between them. Conversations stopped feeling separate from daily life and became daily life itself. He flew to Los Angeles for Thanksgiving. We drove to Joshua Tree and sat beside a fire under a huge desert sky while the wind moved slowly through the Joshua trees around us. I remember watching sparks disappear into the dark and realizing with terrifying clarity that my life was about to change. Not because of the fire, not because of the desert, because of the way he sat beside me. Steady, easy, and certain. The silence between us felt natural, not empty, like something we had built instead of something we were trying to fill. On Christmas morning, he proposed on the Santa Monica boardwalk with his grandmother's ring, a marquise sapphire surrounded by diamonds, chosen not because it was trendy, but because it was real, because it had history, because it had survived another love story before finding its way to mine. That afternoon, we drove to Las Vegas. 2 days later, we were married. 5 months after that, I was standing in a Los Angeles parking lot with two suitcases and a Buddha statue, preparing to leave America for what would become the final time. I want to be honest about what those suitcases contained because I think it matters. Some clothes, a few books, my shoes, toiletries, not much else. The older I got, the more I realized how little of life is actually physical. Most of what we carry cannot be checked at the airport counter. Grief, fear, hope, family patterns, versions of ourselves we haven't fully released yet, and the Buddha. Small enough to fit in the crook of my arm, heavy in the way meaningful things always are. My mother had given it to me when I first moved to Australia at 23, back when she was still fully herself, loud and complicated and alive. Back when she called constantly, leaving voicemails that always began with, "Hi, honey, it's me, Mom," never fully trusting the caller ID thing, and bought gifts that felt symbolic without explaining why. She had been gone for 4 years by the time I stood in that parking lot. 4 years since I sat beside her hospice bed in West Virginia and watched her leave first. 4 years since I learned that sometimes the people who shape you most never get to see who you become. I held the Buddha for a moment before packing it. That's what grief becomes eventually. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just quiet pauses between actions. The smell of someone's perfume on a stranger, a song in a grocery store, the instinct to call someone before remembering you can't. I zipped the suitcase closed. I didn't look back at anything specific as I drove away because there was nothing left behind. No clothes in a drawer, no boxes at my father's house, no half-packed version of myself waiting for me to return. My family had been scattered across New Jersey, West Virginia, Florida, and Virginia, all of them staying while I left again. I said goodbye the way you do when goodbye is real. Long hugs, longer silences, the ache of loving people you're choosing to place an ocean away from. I had never lived with a partner before, not once in 30 years. I had relationships, meaningful ones, messy ones, relationships that cracked me open and forced me to confront parts of myself I would have preferred to avoid. But I had always returned to my own apartment, my own routines, my own space. Now I was flying across the world to live with a man I barely knew in person. At first, we would be staying at his parents' house because we hadn't found our own place yet. I had no work visa, no car, no job, no independence, no idea how to drive on the left side of the road. I want you to understand how terrifying that was. I also want you to understand that I got on the plane anyway, because by then I had already learned something important. The most transformative things in my life had rarely arrived through comfort. I learned this in a New Orleans bathroom at 25, crying during a panic attack I didn't yet have language for. I learned it after being robbed on a beach in Vietnam with nothing but a white bikini and barefoot, and realizing the woman who survived that afternoon was more capable than the woman who arrived. I learned it in silent meditation retreats and yoga ashrams, and all the uncomfortable places that stripped away distraction long enough for me to finally hear myself clearly. Life expands at the edge of what we think we can't survive, not inside what feels safe. So when people ask me constantly and courteously, how can you move to Australia for someone you barely know? I didn't have a clean answer. I still don't. What I had was a body that said yes before my fear could organize an argument against it. I arrived in Sydney on a Tuesday. Kenny picked me up from the airport and drove us towards his parents' house on the outskirts of the city. I smiled the entire drive because I was happy and in love and exhausted and hopeful and still close enough to the fantasy version of reinvention that I hadn't yet understood what was coming. The reality arrived slowly, quietly, the way most hard things do. It arrived in my nervous system before it arrived in my thoughts. A tightness in my chest that appeared without warning, restlessness with nowhere to go, the strange adrenaline of having no independence in a country that wasn't mine yet. I'd spent my entire adult life moving. New Jersey, West Virginia, Australia, Milan, New York, Los Angeles, Southeast Asia, the Caribbean. I was used to motion, used to freedom, used to deciding where I went and when. Now I was in suburban Sydney with no car, no job, no visa, and no private space. My nervous system interrupted stillness as danger. By the fourth morning, I was unraveling quietly. I sat on the edge of the bed in Kenny's childhood bedroom, trying to meditate, and instead felt panic rising through my body like water. Not dramatic panic, the quiet kind. The kind that looks composed from the outside while your heart races so hard you can hear it in your ears. Kenny's mother opened the bedroom door briefly, apologized, and then closed it again. And something about that moment, the realization that I had nowhere private to fall apart, undid me. I slid onto the bathroom floor and cried with a kind of force that leaves your whole body exhausted afterward. The kind of crying that feels less like emotion and more like surrender. Not because I regretted leaving, but because I finally understood the enormity of what I had done. I had left my country, my family, my routines, my independence, the familiar version of myself. I'd crossed an ocean with nothing but intuition and love and faith that the future would meet me there. And for the first time since arriving, I allowed myself to feel how terrifying that really was. That night, I told Kenny the truth, not the polished version, the real one. That I loved him deeply, but I needed space that belonged to us. That I needed a front door I could close, that I was struggling more than I had admitted. He listened. That is one of the greatest gifts another human being can offer you. Not fixing, not dismissing, not minimizing. Listening. Within days, we found an apartment on Bondi Road, a bright yellow building with a tiny wooden boat outside surrounded by banana trees. People called it the Banana Boat Building. The apartment was small and sunlit and imperfect in ours. I unpacked my two suitcases. I placed the Buddha on the table by the front door where the morning light could still find it. And for the first time since arriving in Australia, I finally exhaled. Here is what I know now about leaving. Leaving is not always abandonment. It is not always escape. It is not proof that you do not love the people you leave behind. Sometimes leaving is the most honest thing you can do with the one life you have been given. My mother taught me this accidentally. She spent much of her life leaving too, leaving relationships, leaving states, leaving versions of herself that no longer fit. She left impulsively, emotionally, chaotically, carrying survival patterns inherited from her own mother who once fled through Appalachian woods in the middle of the night with children in tow because staying felt more dangerous than disappearing. I watched my mother leave my entire childhood, and for years I told myself I was nothing like her. Then I moved to Australia 3 times. The difference, the only difference that matters, was intention. My mother left to escape. I left to arrive. She ran from, I ran toward. She packed in the dark. I said goodbye in the daylight. She moved because she feared what would happen if she stayed. I moved because something deep inside me believed there was more waiting for me if I went. There is a moment I return to often now. The day after Christmas in Las Vegas, the morning after Kenny proposed. The city is quiet in the strange way Las Vegas only becomes quiet before the tourists wake up. The air is cold and bright. The sapphire ring catches morning light as we walk down the strip together. We're not discussing marriage or visas or logistics or the future. We're just walking beside each other. And I remember thinking this is what I'm leaving for. Not just the man, not just Australia, not even love itself. I was leaving for the feeling of becoming more of myself instead of less. I have lived in Australia for a decade now. I have a home here, a business, a community, a miniature bull terrier named Shark who has never once questioned where she belongs. I have a husband who still comes back for me when life gets hard, who still listens carefully, who still makes me feel safe enough to tell the truth. And I have finally learned the thing my mother never fully could. Leaving only transforms you when you know the difference between running from your life and running towards it. She ran from, I ran toward. That is how I learned to leave. Thanks for listening to the Inner Self-Confidence Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, let me know because this was something different and I hope you enjoyed it. If not, you can also let me know that you didn't enjoy it. If you want to read about my wild ride from mindlessness to mindfulness, you can pick up my best-selling memoir, Trust the Flames. Amazon is probably the quickest place. You can jump on my website, www.katiedelamon.com. You can check out other places where I sell the book digitally and in print. And if you want to know more about me, what I'm about, working together one-to-one in coaching, or maybe my group coaching, or checking out my nervous system reboot program, it's all on my website. Or maybe you're somebody in corporate wellness in Brisbane, Australia, and you would like to book me in for speaking or some other opportunity. Get in touch, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.